Okay. What we were doing allows me to go to my Bible program and you be able to see it. Just to let you know, also on a note, both Caleb and I had to replace computers this past month. Both of our computers malfunctioned at the same time. Laptops, Joey was praying over the contribution and the things that come up that have to be taken care of. Those are big hits on us personally. And it's just, these are things that plague us, but they have to be done with the work that we're doing. So you can be praying for us in that regard because our funds are consistently being used for things of this nature. Also be praying for, if you saw our broadcast on Wednesday night, you know that we're starting up in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. That's 150 miles from me. That when I go down there that I have to travel, and Ben Hudson is an hour and a half in Richmond, and he'll be coming down from Richmond and helping me several weekends. And so we have great hope for the future there, and hopefully our lesson this morning will encourage all of us to be thinking about that and maybe finding a way to be involved. And so let's begin this morning with our screenshot. You know, I don't know if you realize when we think about things that are spoken to us in the Bible, and you see Proverbs 24:4, by knowledge shall the chambers be filled. And this is actually a Hebrew word right here in the King James, and it is the word for chamber. And it says a primitive root properly to enclose as a room, by analogy to beset as in a siege, enter a privy chamber. It also has a connection to an apartment, usually literal, bed, inner chamber, innermost, ward part, innermostward part, parlor. And let's notice this next verse and then we'll come back. Deuteronomy 32:25. The sword without and the terror within. Now I'm going to come back to that. The terror within. That is the word that we're looking at here. When the statement says the terror within, we're all aware of things that take place inside of us. But, you know, when we're thinking about the persons who are putting this together, we sometimes say, well, what did they know about the chambers of the heart? Anybody here who is a person who is involved in fishing or hunting, maybe not fishing as much, I'm not exactly sure what a fish's heart looks like, but I'm very familiar with what an animal's heart looks like. You don't have to be a hunter if you've been involved in farming, if you had fowl chickens when you were growing up and you ever had to kill the chickens and or pluck the chickens and cut the chickens open. We're all basically, I hope you're thinking, oh yeah, we know a little bit about a heart. Well, I never did cut one open. Somebody says, well, maybe you didn't, but there would be people around you that would. There are people that eat gizzards and things of that nature. So as I'm moving through this, I think that I'm helping you, hopefully, to recognize that we could be aware without scientific knowledge. Persons back then, certainly the Jews who are killing animals every single day, you have Levites that are involved in the slaughter of these animals, you have people that are involved in offering these different animals, they would know that the heart has chambers. And you know, it's an amazing thing that God would talk to us about things that we could be familiar with. And you know, I'm doing all that to show you this wasn't something that was totally outside of the thinking process, and we need to recognize that we need to get a grasp on it, and we're way ahead of them, are we not? Who hasn't heard of different kinds of heart surgery? Who hasn't heard that they need to cut down on their cholesterol oil because of what it's doing, maybe to an artery? Those are things that are being listed here. But I'm particularly looking at the atrium. You know, I don't know how many times I've been in a building and they said, let's just say we were in something, it was a cancer center where I was, and they said, you need to go to the atrium. And I'm like, what is an atrium? And even to the time of working on this lesson, I didn't have it. I'm like, what was this atrium all about? Now I realize it's a large room or a large cavity of some sort or an entrance or whatever. It actually has to do with the room that's, you know, everybody probably but me in this audience this morning knew something about an atrium that had to do with the heart. I don't know. Y'all may have known where to go. I didn't. But here's the point. We need to recognize that what God has in store for us, information He has in store for us, is just really magnificent from the standpoint of what information it can give to us and what relief it can cause you to have when you get the proper information that He wants you to have. Because you could be carrying a tremendous burden that just the information in this lesson could have helped you with. And you might say, well, Johnny, you're looking at Hebrew words, and we're talking about information that seems to be above my head. The way I came to this, I really wasn't looking at Hebrew words. I was looking at thoughts, studying the Bible according to a subject. And I basically had been studying about those who fear God. If you heard the broadcast on Wednesday night, you heard me allude to it just a little bit, how important it is to look for people that really fear God. Whether or not they are members of the body of Christ here, whether or not we really know anything about them, there are people out there that Paul would find, that Abraham found, that they were the last people that he thought would actually be in line with God and actually be on speaking terms, if you could put it that way, being helped out by God and helped out miraculously, as a matter of fact, in the case of Abraham that we'll look at, one of them that we'll look at. So now let's look at that word. The sword without, he's talking to them about things that they will run into and things they'll have to overcome. The sword without and terror within. How many of us have had instances where you have terror within? I don't know how some of you deal with moments of fear. I have a huge imagination, and if you are around me very much, other people have been around me, and they're just like, what is wrong with you? Terry cleaned the building a couple of weeks ago, and I'm saying those of us who are in here all the time leave the lights on all the time downstairs. And I came in, and I could smell the pine sol, and I was saying, boy, this is nice. But the lights were off, and so my office, when I'm coming this way, is actually before the lights. I passed the lights up here, and the lights are further down, so I didn't go down there. I went in the office. And later when I came out, it was daylight, but when I came out, it was dark. And I came out with my bag, and as I came out the door, I turned around and my bag knocked several of the boxes down there. If you've been down there, we got a lot of mailing going on. They hit the floor, it's dark, and I'm like, somebody's in the building with me, and I just about lost it up in here. And the building creaks, and you might say, well, why you be thinking that anyway? We got all kinds of activity going on back here behind our building. I'm saying constant activity with folks that are not employed, that don't have a home, they're moving in and out, and it's just terror within. You may be terrified about other things, but small things that happen to us can give us an inkling, make us think about larger things that would cause terror, and shall destroy both young man and virgin, the suckling also with the man of gray hairs. And then we get the rendering there from the Hebrew word chambers. Proverb 18:8. The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly. Now, when you're reading these people's language, this would be Solomon, you could have been thinking, what do they know about the different portions of the belly? Again, these people are not as often depicted on the Learning Channel or the History Channel, some Bedouins out there in the middle of nowhere, wandering around, don't know where they are and how to get anywhere. These are very scientifically, if you get down to it, smart individuals, can travel in ways that we would never be able to travel with, and they know the different parts of ourselves. Have you ever had somebody tell something on you, and every time you thought about it, you got it in the pit of your stomach? The very thought or the very fact that you said pit of your stomach. If you said to someone, particularly as a young person, Mama, I feel it in the pit of your stomach. What if your mother said, what do you know about the pit in your stomach? There's no pit in your stomach. We don't say that. We've all had those kinds of deep felt feelings. And the Bible constantly talks about having a feeling in our bowels. This would be another allusion to something similar to that. Proverbs 24:4, and by knowledge shall the chambers be filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Knowledge is so important, and as far as our well-being and our inward parts that give us difficulty, that emotions affect, that oftentimes people have ulcers and things of that nature, these are things that would help all of us in that regard. Proverbs 26:22, the words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down in the innermost part of the belly. So, this morning, let's put our minds to knowing ourselves a little bit better. And this is basically, I'm going to go through something with you. I hope that you're going to be able to stay with me. And the reason I'm doing this way is because this is actually something that I had not seen before. In all the years of studying, we just did classes in 2020 on the book of Genesis. I spent weeks and weeks and weeks in Genesis. And, you know, oftentimes as you're reading through, you may not ever step back and try to analyze the bigger picture. You know, I think a lot of people that studied with us for the first time ever actually realized that Genesis was not written to people in Abraham's time. It was actually written at the mountain where the Ten Commandments were given. So Moses was rehearsing all of this information to Jewish people nearly 2,000 years removed from Genesis 3. They were individuals that had information about some of this, but not all of this. And so that was, you know, an eye-opening thing. For instance, to Ben Hudson, he just couldn't believe that there was information of this nature that would help him from then on read his Bible differently and with understanding. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to analyze a big picture. And the reason why we're analyzing it is because of a study that I have been doing in regard to the importance to us as Christians of those that are around us that fear God. Now, you might say, well, if they fear God, why are they not with us? Seriously, do we not believe that there are people out there that respect, revere, that look at God as a greater and themselves a lesser, and they adore Him without actually having figured out the information and put it into the right place so that they can be obedient to Him? Well, if we didn't think that, I would say our brethren at large do not think that, and that's one of the reasons they don't evangelize. We have one preacher in West Texas that actually says that we don't even do evangelism anymore. The Great Commission doesn't apply to us. Why? He says all the saved are saved, and our work as far as evangelists or preachers is just to preach the truth to those that are saved. And you can actually guess he doesn't do any kind of evangelistic work. Us few, nobody knew. That's who he's interested in. Why am I going into the Rocky Mount area? The exact same thing. I happen to believe that the person who it will be my producer and the co-owner of the television station is a person who fears God, that he appreciates God. He tries to understand God, and lately, since we were down there, he's had a baby. They've had a baby. Here we go. We're analyzing the bigger picture. We're talking about the heart, the desires of the heart. What got Adam and Eve in the trouble they were in? What is it that caused them to make the change or make the move? For God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Y'all, I don't know if you've paid attention to the things that actually are stated next, like the different things. You know, a lot of people say, well, she saw the tree was good, and they spend a lot of time talking about people being able to look at something and it sparkled and all this kind of stuff. I've just heard all kinds of stuff. And it was pleasant to the eyes. If you have never eaten a particular fruit, can you answer me? Let's just say a persimmon. Is there anybody here who doesn't know what a persimmon is? You've never eaten a persimmon, and you're looking at it and you're saying, boy, that big, plump, ripe persimmon, it just, boy, is a beautiful thing. Generally, that association comes after you've eaten it. Have you ever actually looked at a fruit that you know good and well is not good for us? and you say, boy, that's a beautiful thing. We might have come up with something of that nature. It looks so good, it makes you think that it ought to be eaten. And a tree to be desired to make one wise. I want to present this as this. You see where my cursor is? This is this. You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil, a tree to be desired to make one wise. What if somebody showed you an old, beat up, somewhat rusty urn, and they said to you, you know, if you rub this the right way and you make a wish, you'll have 3 wishes, anything that you could possibly want. How would it be looking then? And we could make other illustrations when we're talking about things today. Somebody can try to sell you something. They can be offering you something when you go into Sam's that you didn't even intend to think about. The next thing you know, you've got a system all around your house that's supposed to keep you safe, or a system in your roof that inside your crawl space up there that's supposed to take $100 off of your utilities, and you never even were thinking about, but they showed you something that created within you that, oh, this would be the answer to all my problems. Can you imagine being able to participate in something that was going to make you like God, your creator? See how the heart works? They basically were convinced that that's what this tree would do, aside from the other things associated with it that might appeal to your eyes. It's good food, or appeal to your hunger or your eyes, pleasant to the eyes, and desired to make one wise. And she took of the fruit and did eat, and gave it also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. How many times have we gone through that scenario, which one of us, it's usually me, and Lori saying, don't do it, and I'm saying, no, this will be good for us, this will work. How many times have you been in that scenario? The heart was the problem here, and this is really the first account of actions in the Bible. Genesis 6:5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was on evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. You see what we're doing here? We're not passing through very much information. A lot of the information between Genesis 3 and Genesis 6 has to do with genealogical records in Genesis chapter 5 and part of 4. The other thing that you end up having is Cain and Abel, and we could have used them, but I'm trying not to land on everything. But as we're going through these points, you're going to basically see the same progression, or you might say the same digression. You can take a person's life and compare it to this as well as you're going along. You know, y'all, how difficult is it to manage our imagination about things? We're inundated. You know, you might say, well, I don't watch television anymore. Well, do you have YouTube Premium? If you don't have YouTube Premium, guess what? You're watching commercials again. I've had people complain about watching commercials during our broadcast, and I'm saying, you know what? We don't have anything to do with that. I ended up signing up for Premium, free, and man, I'll never go back. Why? No commercials. What do the commercials actually do? They create problems. They generate the idea that we don't have everything that would make us happy or that we need, make us able to accomplish the things that we have. These individuals, by this time frame, every imagination of the heart was on evil continually. Have you ever looked at why we have the internet? Why we have AI? Why we had VCRs? And when you got your first VCR, it probably cost $500, $300, I don't know. Do you know that if you look into the amazing progress that we have in this regard, with the ability for us to have movies in our house and those kinds of things, do you know that it actually is the result of pornography? You remember dial-up on your internet? You sat there and you waited for it to dial up, and then when you would click on something else, you had to wait. And I'm saying this is, you look it up, this is basically scientific information that will be told you, especially in light of AI today. Individuals who were looking at porn realized they could look at porn. Can I tell you something? They ain't gonna wait for dial-up, if at all possible. They will do whatever it takes to move all of that forward, and what it takes is money. They were the individuals that were contributing money. The porn industry, individuals who were watching porn, they were contributing big time in order to hurry up and get the next picture. Move that over to VCRs, the introduction of VCRs. And you know, if you want to hear this by somebody smarter than me, if you happen to listen to, who are we going to see in March or April in Greensboro? What? Jordan Peterson. Here's a psychologist that is world renowned at this point. He gets into this. I didn't hear this from him. I actually heard it, read it in some other studies that I was doing. But why am I bringing this up? Y'all, this is a sex discussion right here. What was the factor that moved these folk even further along? What were they looking at? In 2 Peter 2:14, having eyes full of adultery that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and heart they have exercised with covetous practice. Can I tell you something that we're basically looking at here? Do we realize that incontinence in your mind, I'm not talking about grown-up diapers. Incontinence, you see that, all of us old people that watch daytime TV or people that watch daytime TV, you see them actually selling products because of getting older and your body isn't able to control itself like it did, and it's called incontinence. You're doing something without wanting to. This is the same word that is used when we're talking about 2 Peter 2:14, that cannot cease. Well, how do you get to the point when you can't cease? Having a heart they have exercised with covetous practice. You ever think about the idea that allowing yourself to do a certain thing creates a message or a signal to your conscience, that this is okay? The more I practice a certain thing, and we're not talking about necessarily bad things, we're just talking about this is what makes us have automatic responses that you need. Do you have to think about getting out of the way when you see a car? No, that's an automatic reaction. Do we not realize that our body actually creates automatic reactions in other areas as well? These would be the kinds of things that a person has exercised its mind in regard to, and then you can get to the point. Have you ever heard somebody say, I just can't seem to quit? Well, how did you get to that point? You didn't get to that point the first time you did this thing that you can't seem to quit. See what we're talking about? We're actually, as we go through this, as we develop this, it's going to be what we do and what we have in the chambers of our heart. Notice this. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 14. Now, y'all, we're developing this theme as we go through. We're developing the same theme in a lot of different instances, and it should make us recognize how dangerous certain things are. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 14, and it came to pass that when Abraham was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair, and the princes also of Pharaoh saw her, and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. What is wrong with these people? Are you recognizing what's going on? You don't think Pharaoh was married? Pharaoh wasn't a prince that was looking for a wife. This is an individual that is creating a harem. He sees a beautiful woman. Abraham has to go through a danger discussion with his wife before he ever gets into this land, because he knows these people are this way. And so Pharaoh saw her, or the princes saw her, and commended her to Pharaoh. Insatiable sexual desires. Now, can I ask you something? Are we not being tutored by the Old Testament? Doesn't Galatians 4 call the Old Testament our tutor? What are you learning about society? throughout time. Well, you might say, well, you've only shown us two, and you really didn't show us what was going on here. The sons of men began to go into the daughters. The sons of God began to go into the sons of God began to go into the daughters of men. And you actually have men of renown, and we are being told in Genesis chapter 6 that there were giants in the land. This is not talking about angels and people having relations. This is actually giving you the idea of individuals that are great in stature, and they're breeding in order to create men of renown. What does this have to do with? Power and sexual desire. Look at this. Genesis 14:11. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. Are you seeing a reoccurring story here? Individuals taking things that other people have, whether you start in the Garden of Eden, taking something that you were not supposed to have, it was forbidden, it was not going to be good for you. Then you're basically seeing in Genesis chapter 6, now you're past Genesis chapter 12, watching someone take another man's wife, Abraham's wife. In Genesis 14:11, the people of Sodom are in this war, and all their victuals they have stolen and went their way. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. You know, there are individuals around us that, I don't know if you have ever done this study, but one of the sectors of society that has the most disposable income are young people. Young people have disposable income, and they don't really have any particular things that they're working towards with their money. And so what do you think that the advertising industry, who do they go after? You ever have to bail out one of your kids, one of your offspring, their credit card? Twice? 3 times? And it's like, what is wrong with you? Well, you know, you might step back and warn them. Society is actually doing a number on you because you have this income that's available and you don't have any long-term goals, and you just think, see, you might say different things than what you think. I'm going to take your plastic. Well, that might work, but young people will find a way. So what is actually taking place here? James 4:1, for whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members? You lust, you have not, you kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. You fight and war. This goes on in our community. It goes on at the state level. It goes on at the government. You ever wonder why the people that you elect just don't ever seem to do anything that you elected them for in the first place? What happens when they get up there, when they get into these places? They start seeing all of the different things. I asked Chad Martin one time about kickbacks. And y'all know Chad. He's no dummy. He's an educated man. And he acted like he didn't know what a kickback was. I'm like, I know you're in your first term, but don't tell me that you haven't heard talk about kickbacks as a city councilman. Y'all, it is 101. And if you haven't worked on yourself, you haven't been aware that this is a overarching theme as you march through the Old Testament. We've looked at 4 major accounts, and every one of them have this exact same theme associated with it. What do you think God is trying to do? What attention point is he trying to reach within us? We're susceptible. And it seems like that the devil really doesn't use too many tools. We're susceptible, and what we're trying to get at this morning is, what is the area? Where is the area that the devil is working on, and why is it that we're not immediately saying, you know, I've got to fortify this particular area? Because it seems that every story, Ezekiel, we're going to look at principles here a minute, and we'll get back to the analyzing these different points. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 12. Then said he unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagery? For they say, the Lord seeth us not, the Lord hath forsaken the earth. Now, the chambers here, if you were to read further in Ezekiel 8, you would realize that these individuals had chambers in their dwelling places. The priest had chambers. It's like, I don't remember, I think it was 2,000 different small chambers in the temple that Solomon built. David actually laid these out, and it's laid out in Chronicles. They had images that they prayed to, or whatever it is they did with the images in order to get certain things. And he's basically saying, this is in the unknown, and Ezekiel was being allowed to see it miraculously. On one occasion in Ezekiel 8, he told him to dig through this little wall, and you'll be able to see what they're doing in their idol worship. And why are they doing this? In Jeremiah 22:13, woe unto him that buildeth his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers be wrong, that useth his neighbor's service without wages, and giveth him not for his work. Can I ask you, those of you who have secular jobs, have you gone through any downsizing where the employee amount ratio to the work actually shrunk? Less employees, same amount of work, and they said to you, we've dropped off 2 or 3 employees, and boy, you're like, here it comes, I'm fixing to get a raise. And we're going to want you to try to pick up some of this work. And you might have to work on Saturdays, on the weekend. And you're like, oh boy, here it comes, double time. And then they give it to you. And we're just going to expect you to realize that in order for us to keep going, you need to go ahead and, bump up your workload, and maybe we'll get done with this in a year, something like that. You ever stop to think that some CEOs are getting the same money and maybe even more because they're saving money by downsizing? This is what we're talking about. Individuals who are so covetous that they actually use your neighbor's service without wages and give him not for his work. This all falls in this same idea, and this is one of the reasons that Israel ended up having to be chastised to make them change. Now, their heart darkened. You ever think about, oftentimes we talk about habits, and we talk about maybe being, having a callus. And I think we all know what a callus is. In a certain point, you get to the point where your heart or your feelings are calloused. Here, he's discussing a different way. In Genesis 18:20, and the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. Now, I don't think I have to say very much here in order to prep you to know where we are. Sodom and Gomorrah, they're on their way to have a look and just see how bad it is. Have you ever read in the New Testament the description of how a society actually digresses? Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. When you think about your life as a Christian, let's say you've been a Christian 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or now 20 years, and possibly 25 years, and maybe more. How important is it for you now compared to when you first obeyed? Ian in his class was talking about hospitality, and we were talking about how people don't do things the way they used to, and things are more dangerous, and people are less likely to welcome us in. Do you realize that our nation is right there? The time for us to be faithful is certainly upon us, if ever there was a time. If we believe that we're salt and that we're light, you might say, well, if I get too much light and people start recognizing me, they're going to start putting pressure on me. That could be us making up in our mind, that is what's going to happen when we don't realize what God can actually do on his side. But our nation is to the point where they are vain. It's profitless what they imagine. The things that they're going after to try to accomplish things, it is just totally outside of reality. Genesis 19:5, and they called unto Lot, and they said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. Y'all, are you seeing the progression here? Sexual sin, sexual sin, sexual sin. Individuals who are not restraining themselves in regard to the things that they think about. Why is homosexuality on the rise? We just discussed what it is that has generated the monetary means for the internet, for AI, all of these accomplishments. Now, I will say this, just to help you not just be horrified about that information. The amount of people that are involved with pornography later, after these things develop, diminishes. As everybody gets a VCR, the percentage ends up being way lower than what the beginning was when they were generating all this money. It is much harder, according to these studies, for the people in the porn industry to make a living because of the things that are taking place with free internet service. But nevertheless, all of this began in this fashion. Notice, Romans 1:24, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. So I get this new computer, and as I'm setting it up, I get on the internet the first time, and it has this section on the screen that tells me things that are trending and that I might be interested in. Number 3 on the list, LBGQT. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Why would you list this on a brand new computer as one of the things that just a normal person in the United States might be interested in going to that? That's where we are, y'all. When we start talking about how important it is to keep our hearts and to understand what's going on with other people, which could be our loved ones, that's exactly what we're talking about, as well as ourselves, we need to recognize that there is a war going on for the emotions, for the feelings of the heart. Genesis 20, verse 1. You might be saying, boy, this lesson's never going to end. We are never getting out of Genesis. We're actually staying there on purpose just to show you that the overarching content, if you had ever looked at it and just said, I'm going to look at the high points here and see what was going on. Genesis 20, verse 1, Abraham journeyed from thence towards the south country and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of his wife, she is my sister. And you might be saying, you're repeating something that you just said. That was Genesis 12. This is Genesis 20. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Can you imagine that you were living in a country or living in a world that this was the kind of thing that was going on in a regular basis? You know what we're looking at? We're looking at a world filled with predators. And who is doing right? What is God doing to alter that? Well, if you really want to think about it, he's got Abraham. Are you kidding? Just Abraham? Genesis 20 is where I had started my study. Come to find out, when Abimelech saw in a dream, or dreamed a dream and found out he was a dead man, that he confronted Abraham. He said, why didn't you tell me she was your wife? And he said, because I didn't think the fear of God was in this place. It just so happened that Abimelech is an individual who feared God, and upon being told by God, this is a prophet, my prophet, do him no harm, that it overwhelmed him. Now, this is my point of contact. Why should we be looking for individuals that fear God? And you might be saying, well, how do we do that? Are you a member of the Church of Christ? That is not the way we do it. We're searching for individuals who already have a fear of God. In the New Testament, there is actually a word that refers to people who were not Jews, but were in and amongst them, and it is the word sibomai, and it's translated often fear God or worshipers. These are individuals like the centurion that helped Paul out, the centurion that came to Jesus, that are in and around us, that have a healthy reverence from God. Are they able to put that into practice properly in all respects? No. They're missing some elements. Well, what are you telling us that for? Because that's where we come in. Do you want people, we're looking at husband-wife relationship. No, we're looking at predators in every regard who would do damage, do hurt to our family members, to our loved ones, to people around us. Who's going to tell them? This, y'all, is where we're talking about our broadcasts and our Facebook and all the different things that we do, door to door. This is how we actually influence these individuals and strengthen their reverence, strengthen their fear and respect of God, and help them to channel it in a direction that will help them and eventually help us. All of these individuals, all of this progression is pretty much the same thing. Now, this is the last account. But we moved far ahead. And to me, this impressed me the most in this study. I expected what we saw out of these other individuals. If I didn't expect it, I actually found out how the civilization was doing back then. But here, a story of a humble sheep herder who became a king. And you read in his writings, Psalm 51:4, against thee only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest and be clear when thou judgest. What could this king, whose name is David, be talking about? And he says in verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Now, y'all, if this is not a part where you are encouraged, I don't know anything better. This is the man after God's own heart, and his relationship, his vigilance deteriorates to the point where he ends up begging that God help him have a clean heart and renew a right spirit within him. 2 Samuel 11:3. How'd you feel about Abimelech? How'd you feel about Pharaoh? How do you feel about the people in Genesis chapter 6 that were having their imagination on evil continually? Well, they all deserved it. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her. Insatiable sexual desire. Unrestrained behavior. Now, sometimes we talk to each other and we have this kind of behavior where we maybe put on an air where we say, you don't approach this area of my life, and I won't approach yours, and we'll just kind of go along. But after, I don't know what this lesson's doing for you, but after a lesson like this, it's like, as you go through the Old Testament and you see these events, every one of them has something in common, and everybody in here is participating in the same problem, but when we talk, we're going to rise above that, and we're just going to pretend that none of that's going on with us. Well, you can pretend if you want to. The life I live, it's extremely difficult in this sense. It is just fraught with all kinds of situations that create hardships for me. I'll give you an example. I'm going down to Rocky Mount. I'm going to be on a very, very tight schedule. And the hotel that I was looking at is run by an Indian gentleman. And he showed me a room for $55 a night. And one of our family members has had problems in some nice hotels in the last 3 years, like unwanted guests that go from the hotel to your own house, and you can almost never get rid of them. And I staying in that particular instance was a Hilton twice. And I'm looking at that, and here's a part of me that says, there's a nice DoubleTree over by the hospital in Rocky Mount. Somehow or other, I got to figure out how to get myself into that. And then I'm thinking, no, this is not going to work. This is back to raising money for the Marshall Islands and staying in hotels in the Marshall Islands to get this done. And you might say, well, how in the world can you get to that point? Just give me just a few more minutes and maybe we can get there. But are you seeing this? Here is one of the two figures, if you really get down to it. Abraham and David are the two most prominent figures that God uses as examples of ourselves and examples of his kindness and mercy towards us. Abraham is an individual who has to be patient, waiting through all kinds of hardships. David is an individual who finds himself in a situation where he ends up saying and pleading. If you've read Psalm 51, if you haven't, read it when you're leaving or when you're in your trip, on your road or whatever. Create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me. You mean to tell me that David had gotten to the point where he needed to be restored? Genesis 11:6, and the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they began to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. You know, we talk a lot about a tower, but let us notice this part. Let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven. Let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Are they in the skyscraping business? Are these architects? Is that what they're up to? Or is it this portion right here? Let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. I believe these individuals are doing what they're doing the way that they're doing in order to make themselves seem invincible. And whatever they're doing, help them to be invincible. I don't know what the Tower of Babel looked like. I don't know how tall it is, but I do know this. In America, that's the tallest peak. It's in Alaska. It's Denali, 20,000 feet. That's just almost 4 miles high. Here is another group of individuals that somewhere around 700, I don't know if it's BC. I kind of think it is BC now that I'm thinking about it. The people of Tibet. This is the highest region on the earth with an average elevation, just in general elevation, not talking about this place, 14,000 feet. Located in the Himalayas, the highest elevation is Tibet. In Tibet is Mount Everest. Look at that. 29,000 feet, that's almost 6 miles. And what are they doing? They're building these impressive entities or these impressive buildings. And what do they have? 520 million followers. And it's the world's 4th largest religion. Are you seeing what we're doing here? This is the way that they accomplished what they have in the world today. And oftentimes when we look at things of this nature and we look at what we want, which is notoriety, and I'm not saying each of us individual, I'm talking about in a spiritual sense. Do we not want notoriety for the cause of Christ? And we start thinking about how would we do that? Well, if we could do something like this, can I tell you the folk in the Church of Christ have this same mentality? You go down into Nashville and you look at the buildings. The money that 5 congregations in Nashville used to build their building, we could evangelize from here to Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And I'm saying do a tremendous job at it. Look at this. Have you actually looked at the Roman Catholic Church? The statistics associated with it? 1.3 billion individuals. And there's their city, Vatican City. 8,000 people. Not even 8,000, 800 something people in Vatican City that actually live there. And they have 1.3 billion adherents. What are we doing? We're basically looking at people's hearts and what they do, what they accomplish, and what they use. The chamber of cognitive dissonance. Now, y'all, this is not science, and I want you to really get this because this is where the devil works on us. Within these walls, conflicting thoughts collide. The clash of beliefs, the dissonance, mixed signals between what we preach and what we secretly crave. You know, when I was reading this and I thought about my own self, the dissonance between what we preach, practice what you preach. Have you not been told that as an individual? The dissonance between what we preach and what we secretly crave. Do you ever stop and you basically say about yourself as you're thinking and you're thinking about trying to be a better Christian, or you're thinking about things that you could accomplish for Christ, and you say, I have this desire to do that, and especially on Sundays after we hear lessons and we study God's Word. But then when I leave, I have these cravings. A desire versus a craving, I have these insatiable cravings. And when you say insatiable, we're not talking about sexual cravings. We're talking about things like, I am scared to death about the future, this year in particular. And What can I do to make sure that I've got everything taken care of, a nest egg and all these things in case the economy takes a dip for this reason or that reason? And it's like we crave things that, when we think about it, it's not inordinate. It's not against God's law to think about our well-being. But when it gets to the point where we know that we're not operating, on Ian's class this morning, we were talking about us being hospitable. And it's like, as he went through this, I know different individuals here were saying, I am so glad we had this lesson because this really encourages me because I'm one of the hospitable people. People stayed in my home and we just have this great relationship. And then others were saying, wonder what is my problem that I'm not helping these individuals and I just don't, I've got all kinds of reasons why I can't. I want to make sure that you're not overwhelmed here. Romans 7 says this is where life's battle is fought. Romans 7:23, but I see another law in my members warring against the law of my mind. Y'all, this is the Christian life. It is called cognitive dissonance. It's different messages that are taking place in different chambers of your heart. And those things are common to everybody. And even if you get to this point right here, where you end up saying, man, I've got to turn this thing around somehow, and I don't know how, as I start thinking about the things that are being asked of me, and as I realize that these things are right and I'm not there, and you're saying, God, create a clean heart in me. Help me to renew a right spirit. Maybe help me to be a certain way that I was at a certain time that I can actually point at. This is the constant that happens with all of us, and it's not a time to give up. And I hope that you recognize I'm saying these are the kinds of things that I deal with, same kinds of things that Caleb deals with, the things that everybody in here deals with. We grapple with our own contradictions, stitching together a patchwork quilt of rationalizations, and sometimes we hate ourselves. But as long as you're listening, as long as you can say the word war is happening within me, it's not like you have to condemn yourself. In Psalm 37 verse 4, delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thy heart. What do you want? I want my wife to be faithful. I want my husband to be faithful. I want my children to be faithful. I want these extended members of my family that won't seem to obey even though they know the truth. Delight yourself in the Lord. Try to practice these things that we've talked about this morning, having the chambers of your heart filled in places with the things that God says that you should be embarking on, and try to work on these others. And it's a constant, lifelong affair. Can I encourage you this morning? And you might say, how in the world are you going to encourage us with a billionaire? This guy's a billionaire. Grant Cardone talks about himself. He says, my overnight success, and that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, fired from 7 jobs, overcame drug addiction. Now right here, his drug addiction was his big problem in his 20s, 10 years into it. The best day of his life, he says, when his mother cut him off completely from all funds, all help. And he basically hit rock bottom and had to figure out something else. He still was addicted for 2 more years, but he continued to work. Now I want you to look at this. Now y'all, this is not something that is beyond, like, Johnny, why are you showing us a dude that flew 3 million miles? Do you realize that doing mission work, you can get up into 500,000-600,000 miles in a short time? You start flying 3. I never got to this point, but I can tell you this. Cold calls, right here, cold call 10,000 businesses. You know what a cold call is? When they don't think you're coming and they don't know who you are, and you just got to throw it out there and try to make a sale. Do you know how many doors we knocked in 1 year in Danville while Norm Fields was here? 14,000 cold calls. Now, if this guy is making success with these kinds of numbers, and that was just 1 year with us, y'all, you start moving down this list, and you would be amazed at things that we could put into play here. We don't fly, but when you start thinking about the amount of information that goes out, we have 3 million plus views on our YouTube, and that's not counting all the people who put up our YouTube. They take our videos and they put them up on their site and get 100,000 views. So if 3 million flight miles got him to be a billionaire as part of, and 12,000 cold calls, and we know that we made 14,000 cold calls in one day, what I'm trying to do is encourage you to realize that you are helping in a magnificent way. And the amount of things that we've actually done that could be compared to somebody getting to be a billionaire, and we've got to convince ourselves this morning that the little things that we do, they're not really that significant. Are you kidding? Do you realize by doing the cold calls, just that alone, that we have people all over the United States that are talking about the effort that we put forth? And y'all, I'm saying I am in a constant mode of encouraging you to help me do these things. Can I tell you, when I think about going to Rocky Mount and not moving, but putting myself where I'm not always involved with you all, I'm not a happy thought. The only reason I'm doing it this time, this will be my third time, this will be my fourth time. The reason I'm doing it this time is because Ben is in Richmond. And he's basically said, when I did the show on Wednesday night, he sent me a text that said 1.5 hours, and I'll be there. 1.5 hours from Richmond on I-95, don't even have to get on the side road, straight to Rocky Mount. And he's a major in the Army. He has his own time off, and he and his daughter are all by themselves. Walked 100,000 apartment units. How many houses do y'all think that we have knocked on, and apartments that we've knocked on in the last 20 years in this area? I guarantee you it's 100,000. When we're doing 14,000 in 1 year, and we got 20 other years to put the math to, not to mention the fact that we're not just talking about tents and things of that nature. Sent over 400 million emails. You know, one website called Answering the Church of Christ, within a year, got over 150,000 back and forths. Somewhere out of Danville, these people were just determined to get rid of us. This was in the early 2000s. It doesn't take that long to send out. And I would encourage you, if you don't mind, use your Facebook to help us out, because when we do the shows that we did on Thursday, individuals are all over the place, and it's oftentimes just a few of us up in here that are answering back. Matthew 23, verse 37. You know, sometimes when you read this verse or when you hear this verse, you're like, oh man, not that verse again. Jesus said unto them, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. I am convinced that members of this congregation can say that the one thing that I am not going to give up, it gets tough, I feel weak, I may feel like David, and you may not have ever seen that verse before, Psalm 51:10. Renew in me a right spirit. And you might say at that point, it's pointless. I've got these habits and they've overcome me, and I just do this same thing over and over. There's no hope for me. Really? Were you actually taking somebody else's mate and end up killing that other person to keep the mate or destroying them? No, I wasn't doing that. Well, can I tell you something? There's hope for you. There's one thing in your life, of all the things that you have affection for, that you're not going to give up. And many of you that are here are 20 years into it, and you haven't given up, and you're still plowing forward, even though you may feel terrible and you don't put it on. We don't see it. We just know you're here, and if we asked you how you're doing, you might say hanging in there, and we don't know what that actually means, but it could mean what we're talking about this morning. I think that you all represent individuals who love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and mind. I can tell you this, there are plenty of people outside of here that say that kind of thing about y'all. I think we mentioned it in class this morning. A young guy older guy actually went to a preacher's meeting, and they were talking about what in the world are we going to do? The church is on the decline. People didn't come back for COVID, and he said, I think we need to start doing what they do in Virginia. Man, you talk about turn the knives. Knives came out. Fangs came out. All they wanted to do is just chomp on him. And the thing they were chomping on him was the fact that Caleb had an interview with a man who at one time feared God above all the people that I actually know. He was one of the most sought after, one of the most diligent members of the body of Christ, a gospel preacher and evangelist. And now he's fallen off. And what we're trying to do is help him renew a right spirit within himself. And folk are hating on us. Can you imagine if that's the way people feel about this individual, how they must be preaching to the congregations where they are? Misery. And I hope this morning that that's not the message that you're getting, but realizing, listen, this is comparable to the 20 years that we've been working together in several aspects. And so you're to be greatly appreciated, and I do appreciate you this morning. And if it is the case that you fall into that category, you fear God, but you haven't put into practice the things that you put in practice so you can channel your obedience in the right way, and God can bless you beyond what you ever dreamed. And or if you're one of those persons who say, you know, I've let these things get ahead of me and get control of me, and there's just no way. No. Psalm 51:10. Pray that God can help you to renew a right spirit and start incrementally fighting the war a little bit harder. It's a constant. Thrilled that you're with us this morning. If we can assist you in areas that I think we've made clear in other times, why don't you let us do that now or quickly in the future while we stand and sing.